Breaking news. Sentebale plunged into crisis as leadership rift forces. Harry and Seeiso to step away. It began with whispers in the boardroom, hushed concerns exchanged in confidential trustee meetings, and lingering questions over why a charity built on hope and healing had started to miss its most basic obligations: timely reports, financial disclosures, and the transparency that once gave donors confidence. Today, those whispers have exploded into a full-blown crisis at Sentebale, the charity co-founded by Prince Harry and Prince Seeiso of Lesotho, after its chairwoman, Sophie Chandauka, refused to resign despite being asked by trustees to step down. For Harry and Seeiso, the breakdown in leadership became so severe that both men, once the heart and global face of Sentebale, have now stepped back as patrons, citing the dysfunction as untenable. Their withdrawal has shaken the charity world, tarnished Sentebale's once golden reputation, and raised serious questions about how a vision born in memory of Princess Diana and Queen Mamohato could unravel so dramatically under the weight of mismanagement and power struggles. At the centre of the storm is Chandauka, a Zimbabwe-born lawyer and corporate executive who became Sentebale's chairwoman in 2021 with great promise. Lauded for her business acumen, connections, and reputation as one of the UK's most influential black leaders in finance, she was meant to be the steadying hand that could guide Sentebale into its next chapter of growth. Instead, critics say, she has presided over confusion, poor governance, and a failure to meet even the most basic requirements of accountability. According to multiple insiders, trustees privately approached Chandauka earlier this year, urging her to consider stepping aside. They argued that her leadership style had alienated staff, muddled decision-making, and created paralysis in financial reporting. Worse, the organization's official website continued to boast of accountability and transparency, even as statutory reports and impact statements were delayed or missing altogether. But Chandauka refused. Her decision to remain in office against trustee pressure deepened the rift and left Harry and Seeiso with little choice but to disengage. Their joint statement, sources say, was curt and tinged with disappointment. They could no longer put their names behind a charity where the breakdown in leadership made our continued involvement untenable. This seismic decision has rocked the humanitarian landscape far beyond Lesotho. For nearly 2 decades, Sentebale was more than a charity. It was a symbol. Founded in 2006, after Harry and Seeiso bonded over the loss of their mothers, the organization embodied a commitment to children left behind by HIV, AIDS, poverty, and stigma. Its name, Forget-Me-Not, in Sesotho, spoke to remembrance, love, and dignity for the vulnerable youth of Lesotho and later Botswana. The fact that its 2 figurehead patrons are now distancing themselves marks not just a governance crisis, but a spiritual collapse of Sentebale's identity. The legacy now in jeopardy. For years, Sentebale was one of the brightest spots in Harry's philanthropic portfolio. While his royal life was entangled in media scrutiny and family politics, Sentebale remained a constant, a project where his heart and authenticity were never doubted. He was photographed dancing with children, embracing HIV-positive teens, and walking hand in hand with young orphans. For Harry, this was not just charity. It was personal redemption, a way of living Diana's legacy of compassion. But the crisis has shifted the narrative. Instead of stories of impact and healing, headlines are now dominated by governance failures, donor unease, and speculation about whether Sentebale can survive without its most visible patrons. In Lesotho, where communities once celebrated the annual Sentebale polo matches as a symbol of solidarity, there is growing anxiety that donor funding may dry up, leaving youth programs underfunded. One senior staffer, speaking anonymously, admitted, "Donors, too, have begun to waver. Several high-profile benefactors, particularly those in the US who were drawn to Harry's personal involvement, are reconsidering their commitments. Financial jeopardy looms, and without radical restructuring, Sentebale could face not just reputational ruin, but operational paralysis." Chandauka's defense and the question of power. For her part, Sophie Chandauka has remained largely silent in public, refusing to comment directly on reports of trustee unrest or her refusal to resign. Supporters say she has been unfairly scapegoated, that she inherited systemic problems, and that her refusal to quit reflects determination rather than arrogance. Some even argue that as a black woman leading a high-profile charity, she faces disproportionate scrutiny compared to her male predecessors. But critics reject this defense. They argue that leadership is not about identity politics, but about responsibility. Sentebale's reports have been late. Its communications have been muddled. Its once unifying patron base has fractured, and donors now whisper about lost confidence. For them, the facts speak louder than deflection. Chandauka's leadership has not stabilized the organization. It has destabilized it further. One trustee who resigned in frustration put it bluntly: the shock of Harry and Seeiso's exit. Perhaps the most devastating blow to Sentebale's morale is the exit of its co-founders. Harry and Seeiso stepping back is not a cosmetic change. It's a foundational earthquake. Their names, their credibility, their networks of donors and global influence were the very oxygen Sentebale breathed. Without them, the charity risks becoming just another struggling NGO rather than the internationally recognized brand it once was. The symbolism is brutal. Harry, once so personally committed that he risked political backlash by speaking candidly about HIV stigma, has now distanced himself from his own project because of a governance breakdown. For Seeiso, a prince of Lesotho deeply tied to his nation's vulnerable children, the decision was equally painful. Together, their step back is a verdict on Chandauka's leadership and a signal to the world that Sentebale's house is no longer in order. To understand the gravity of this crisis, one must return to Sentebale's founding story. In 2004, Prince Harry travelled to Lesotho on his gap year and met Prince Seeiso, the younger brother of Lesotho's king. The two bonded instantly, not only as young royals, but as young men who had lost their mothers in tragic circumstances. Harry had lost Princess Diana in 1997, while Seeiso's mother, Queen Mamohato, passed in 2003. Out of their shared grief emerged a mission: to honour their mother's legacies by caring for children who had lost everything. HIV/AIDS had devastated Lesotho, leaving tens of thousands of orphans in its wake. The princes co-founded Sentebale, meaning forget-me-not, to provide healthcare, psychosocial support and educational opportunities for the most vulnerable. For Harry, this was never just philanthropy, it was personal redemption. He often spoke of how his work with children living with HIV/AIDS gave his life meaning, echoing his mother's fearless compassion in tackling stigma. For Seeiso, it was a patriotic duty, a promise to uplift his people's most vulnerable children. In its first decade, Sentebale became synonymous with hope. With high-profile fundraising polo matches, celebrity endorsements, and powerful testimonials from the children it served, the charity built both reputation and trust. Donors saw their money at work. Communities in Lesotho and later Botswana saw tangible results. That was the promise. And it is precisely that promise which now feels broken. The arrival of Sophie Chandauka. When Sophie Chandauka was appointed chairwoman, optimism surged. A Zimbabwean-born, UK-based corporate powerhouse, she had risen through the ranks at Baker McKenzie and Morgan Stanley and was widely regarded as one of the most influential black women in business. She spoke passionately about governance, inclusion, and transparency, values Sentebale claimed as its foundation. Her appointment was hailed as a bold step forward, especially as Harry had begun to step back from his royal duties and relocate to the US. Supporters believed Chandauka would provide the professional rigor needed to secure Sentebale's financial sustainability, broaden its donor base, and fortify its governance. But within 2 years, insiders say, tensions were already simmering. Trustees complained about her leadership style, describing it as autocratic and out of touch with the charity's grassroots mission. Staff turnover increased, decisions were delayed or second-guessed. Most critically, financial reporting deadlines were missed. The Sentebale website continued to boast of accountability and transparency, Yet annual reports and impact statements, once a source of pride, began to fall behind schedule. Donors quietly noticed. Trustees grew anxious. The gap between the charity's rhetoric and its reality widened dangerously. The call to resign. By early 2025, matters reached a breaking point. Several trustees approached Chandauka privately, urging her to consider stepping aside in the interest of the charity. Their argument was blunt. Under her leadership, Sentebale was losing credibility, its reputation was faltering, and its most visible figureheads were growing frustrated. But Chandauka refused. According to one insider, she viewed the calls to resign as a challenge not just to her leadership, but to her identity as a Black African woman in a high-profile position. In her view, stepping down would mean succumbing to what she considered unfair scrutiny. Her refusal stunned colleagues. The impasse dragged on, poisoning the atmosphere and paralyzing governance. At one heated trustee meeting, described by an attendee as chaos in slow motion, voices were raised, accusations flew, and the deep fractures within the board were laid bare. The breaking point, Harry and Seeiso stepped back. For Harry and Seeiso, the charity was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place above politics and power games. But as reports continued to be delayed and donor confidence faltered, their patience wore thin. Behind closed doors, they appealed for unity and for the chairwoman to step down voluntarily, but their pleas went unanswered. By mid-2025, they reached the painful conclusion that they could no longer remain patrons of a charity mired in dysfunction. Their joint statement, sources confirm, was short but devastating. The fallout was immediate. Media headlines around the world framed the story as a royal retreat, with tabloids casting Harry's exit as yet another chapter in his turbulent post-royal journey. But insiders insist this was no personal drama. It was about governance, plain and simple. A reputation in jeopardy. The reputational damage is immense. Sentebale, once one of the most trusted royal-linked charities, now faces an existential crisis. Donors are uneasy, partners are cautious. Communities in Lesotho are fearful. Financial analysts warn that without its patrons, Sentebale risks losing millions in pledged donations. For a charity that depends heavily on fundraising events tied to Harry's name, particularly the annual polo tournaments, this is a financial earthquake. And for the young people of Lesotho, it is a betrayal. Programs that provided HIV testing, mental health support, and educational assistance may now face cuts or closure. One young beneficiary, now 18, who grew up under Sentebale's programs, expressed heartbreak. The global conversation. The Sentebale scandal is more than a local crisis. It is sparking global debate about accountability in charities, particularly those linked to high-profile figures. Observers note that while celebrity patronage can elevate causes, it can also obscure governance failures until they spiral out of control. Some critics argue that Harry should have acted sooner, leveraging his influence to demand reform before resigning. Others counter that, by stepping back, he has sent the strongest possible signal that Sentebale cannot continue down its current path. What is clear is that without radical change, Sentebale may not survive, and even if it does, its legacy will be forever tainted by this period of dysfunction. To all my curious Sussex family, thank you all for watching, and do not forget to subscribe, like and put a comment. Bye-bye. See you in our comment section.